This video is sponsored by Brilliant. The first 200 people to go to brilliant.org/middle8 will get 20% off an annual premium subscription, but more on that later. Enjoy. I wasn't a Taylor Swift fan until I heard Folklore. Her 8th studio album has her transport her sound towards a more indie folk arena, but where it truly shines is in its creative songwriting. While in isolation, Swift's mind ran wild as she found herself not only writing her own stories, but writing about and from the perspective of people she had never met, people she had known and those she wished she hadn't. Folklore was the result, a collection of songs and stories that blur the lines between fantasy and reality. Swift purposely placed Easter eggs throughout the tracks, created character arcs, and addressed recurring themes. In particular, she noted that 3 songs on the album explored a teenage love triangle, offering the listener a chance to hear each entangled lover's perspective on the affair. They portray a summer of love and loss, one that left its mark on 3 individuals who all went their separate ways. Let's unravel this timeless tale and learn how Taylor Swift forges a folklore. The summer love affair can be found in 3 tracks: Cardigan, August, and Betty. I think it's best we begin with August, as it explains the onset of the affair. August is a collection of memories from an unnamed girl. It places us by the seaside, where 2 lovers had gotten close during late summer nights. But the narrator of this track knew that as enjoyable as this heated fling had been, it had an inevitable end. She repeatedly calls this romance something that was never mine.
August slipped away like a bottle of wine, 'cause you were never mine.
The boy she spent that August with was James, and the reason he was not quite hers is because James had a girlfriend, Betty. We never learn of this other girl's name, and she'll hardly get mentioned again in the other 2 songs, but August is her chance to voice her point of view of this illicit love. She was young and captivated by this boy.
I remember thinking I had you.
They got lost in one another, and it seemed like moments fleeted by in their time together. The track Mirror Ball could also be seen as her detailing their intimacies.
Hush, when no one is around, my dear.
Their desire for one another and the hope of a future together was enough for this young girl.
So much for summer love and saying us, 'cause you weren't mine.
But things didn't work out in her favor. When the summer ended, so did their romance. And we'll learn more about why when we hear from James's point of view. The track ends with our narrator taking one last trip down memory lane and recalling how this whole rendezvous between her and James had even started.
Remember when I pulled up and said get in the car and then canceled my plans just in case you called.
Betty follows 17-year-old James returning to school after his brief romantic escapade in August.
Betty, I won't make assumptions about why you switched your homeroom, but I think it's 'cause of me.
Betty learned of his fling from a gossip named Inez and is now doing what she can to avoid seeing James. But he's already showing some regret for his actions, blaming his age and immaturity.
It was just a summer thing. I'm only 17. I don't know anything, but
The track includes James's account of how the affair initially began. It started after a school dance, where James stormed out on Betty after seeing her dance with some other guy.
I was nowhere to be found. I hate the crowds, you know that. Plus I saw you dance with him.
James decides to head home, but on his walk from the dance, the girl from August pulls up next to him.
She said, James, get in, let's drive. Those days turned into nights, slept next to her.
He falls into temptation and starts an entanglement with this new girl, claiming he dreamt of Betty while he slept next to her. Fast forward to the present moment, James spends the rest of the track attempting to win Betty back.
Yeah, sure, that's your party. Will you have me? Will you love me? Will you kiss me?
And the narrative ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. James shows up to Betty's party unannounced, prepared to apologize, but it's not yet clear how Betty responds. More importantly, there's a reference to her cardigan.
Standing in your cardigan.
It's appropriate that Cardigan is a track from Betty's point of view then. There's a reference to the cobblestones like the ones James walked on when he fled from the dance. Betty brings up the naivety of being young. Again, something James mentioned in his track.
High heels on cobblestones. When you are young, they assume you know nothing.
Swift has said that one of the images that inspired Folklore was a cardigan that still bears the scent of loss 20 years later. And the track Cardigan sounds like Betty reminiscing about her lost young love years thereafter. She's looking back on her relationship with James, the good and the pain. Betty reflects on being lost and insecure and how James made her feel special.
You put me on and said I was your favorite.
But when James decided to pursue two women at once, he'd surely lose at least one of them. It's a betrayal Betty still feels all these years later.
Chase two girls, lose the one. When you are young, they assume you know nothing.
She recounts the night that James would come back to her with his apology, attempting to change their ending.
I knew you'd miss me once the thrill expired, and you'd be standing in my front porch light.
This love clearly left its mark on her, and from just these 3 tracks, it's difficult to tell if Betty walked away or took James back. Cardigan has Betty express a lot of this with some longing, and does say that James tried to change the ending. Considering they're speaking to us from 2 different time periods, maybe the ending was just that. The end. But the thing is, you could argue that this whole album services the continuation of this narrative. Alyssa Affairs sees the other girl recount more from the summer fling.
Make sure nobody sees you leave.
Exile has 2 lovers, presumably Betty and James, officially ending their relationship.
I think I've seen this film before, and I didn't like the ending.
The one could be Betty telling herself she's over James and trying to move forward.
But it would have been fun if you would have been the one.
And the folklore doesn't end there. James gets his own arc that sees him continuing to right his wrongs with Betty even after high school. But with no luck, he decides to leave town and enlists in the army, where he eventually meets his end, dying in battle. My Tears Ricochet tells of his funeral, while Hoax sees Betty struggling to process James's death. It's then that she finally decides to leave her past behind and head to Rhode Island. 7 has Taylor introduce herself into the narrative. Eventually, Taylor buys the Rhode Island home that Betty lived in. And finally, references how fate can tie 2 soulmates together, how past romantic failures, like Betty and James's, paved the way for her own present relationship. Yes, there's a teenage love triangle within Folklore, but when rearranged, the whole album follows the fictional life of Rebecca Harkness, the previous owner of Taylor's home in Rhode Island, who also happened to go by Betty. It ends with Taylor taking over the house and the memories inside of it. And for an album written in quarantine, that's pretty genius. Folklore had Swift's imagination craft a history about the house she was confined to, writing from the perspective of the people and the lives that once lived in it, a collection of memoirs and emotions that blur the lines between reality and fantasy. It's Taylor realizing that her home is her story, her folklore. Swift created an album that begged to be dissected. And if you like my videos, then you love understanding concepts at a deeper level, especially when it comes to music and sound. But as much as I love explaining these things, the best way to learn anything is by doing it yourself. Brilliant is a great way to learn about complex topics by solving fun and challenging problems. You should check out their Waves course if you want to know more about the science behind music, how guitars create and hold sound waves, how we measure the speed of sound, and the wave magic behind noise-canceling headphones. Brilliant is really great at taking these concepts and breaking them down into bite-sized pieces of info. You can sign up for free at brilliant.org/middle8. I'll put that down in the description for you. It really helps support this channel. And as a bonus for Middle 8 viewers, the first 200 people will also get 20% off their annual membership. But tell me, what do you think of Taylor's Folklore? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you loved it. Follow us at More Middle 8 on Twitter and Instagram. And that's it from me. Again, thanks for watching, and keep listening.